mind a quiet, well-tended garden where thoughts grow and blossom in peace? Or is it a chaotic, overstuffed storeroom, filled to the ceiling with the clutter of yesterday's regrets, tomorrow's anxieties, and the deafening noise of a world that never stops talking? For most of us, if we are truly honest, it is the latter. We live within a prison of our own making, its walls built from past failures, its bars forged from future fears. We carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations, a million unresolved worries, and the relentless hum of a mental to-do list that never seems to shrink. This isn't just background noise, it's a cacophony that drains our energy, stifles our creativity, and steals the simple joy of being present in our own lives. We search for solutions in productivity hacks, in new apps, in endless streams of content, seeking to add more in the hopes of fixing the feeling of being overwhelmed. But what if the answer isn't to add more, but to take away? What if the path to clarity, power, and peace isn't through accumulation, but through release? This is a story about a man whose mind was the most cluttered room of all, and his journey to find the key, not to organize the chaos, but to unlock the door and let it all go. This is the story of learning to empty your mind. His name was Kyle, and by every external measure, he was a monumental success. He was a brilliant architect, a man who sculpted skylines and bent concrete and glass to his will. His firm's name was etched onto plaques in the lobbies of shimmering towers that pierced the clouds. He lived in a penthouse apartment where the city sprawled beneath him like a glittering circuit board, a testament to the order and complexity he commanded. Yet, inside his mind, there was no order. There was only chaos. Kyle's inner world was a relentless storm. He was haunted by the ghosts of projects that had gone wrong, a minor calculation error from a decade ago that would replay in his dreams with catastrophic consequences. He was tormented by the specters of future projects, 1,000 potential points of failure that his mind would construct with agonizing detail. He didn't just design buildings, he designed anxieties, constructing elaborate blueprints of everything that could, and in his mind, would go wrong. His thoughts were not his own. They were a committee of cruel critics. There was the voice of his stern father, always questioning if he was truly working hard enough. There was the voice of a university professor who had once doubted his vision, a voice that echoed every time Cale faced a creative block. There was the incessant whispering voice of his own self-doubt, the most vicious critic of all, which cataloged his every perceived flaw and inadequacy. He would sit in meetings, surrounded by colleagues, and while his mouth said the right things, his mind was a battlefield. He'd be mentally revisiting a tense email from the morning, preemptively drafting responses to criticisms that hadn't been made, and simultaneously worrying if the tremor in his hand was the sign of a serious illness. He was a man spread thin across time, perpetually anchored in the regrets of the past while being pulled apart by the anxieties of the future. The present moment was a place he rarely visited, a fleeting, blurry landscape seen from a speeding train. This constant mental exertion came at a cost. He suffered from debilitating migraines. Sleep was a rare commodity, a shallow and turbulent ocean he could never fully sink into. His relationships were frayed, as he was never truly present with the people he loved. He would look at his partner, listen to her talk about her day, but his mind would be dissecting a contractor's report or stressing about a looming deadline. He was a phantom in his own life, his body moving through the world, while his consciousness was trapped in the swirling vortex of his own thoughts. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Kyle was presenting the final designs for a revolutionary new cultural center, the project that was meant to be his legacy. He stood before a boardroom of clients, the culmination of 2 years of sleepless nights and relentless work projected on the screen behind him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The air in his lungs turned to lead. The voices in his head, usually a dull roar, became a deafening scream. The blueprints on the screen dissolved into a map of his failures. The faces of the clients blurred into a gallery of judgment. The room began to spin, the floor falling away from him, and he collapsed, his meticulously ordered world shattering into a million pieces. He awoke in a sterile white hospital room, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor the only sound. The diagnosis was not a heart attack or a stroke, but something more insidious, a severe panic attack brought on by chronic, unrelenting stress. The doctor, a kind woman with weary eyes, gave him a prescription for medication, but also a piece of unsolicited advice. "Mr. Kale," she said softly, "your body is screaming for a break. Not a vacation on a beach, but a break from the prison of your own mind. You've built magnificent structures for the world, but you have neglected the home you must live in every single second of your life." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. A prison. That's exactly what it was. And for the first time, Kyle understood that he was both the inmate and the warden. He knew the pills would only muffle the noise. They wouldn't silence it. He needed something more. He needed to tear the whole structure down. His forced recovery, he began a desperate search. He read books on philosophy, psychology, and ancient wisdom. Most of it felt like intellectual jargon, more clutter to add to the storeroom. But then he stumbled upon a faded, obscure article online. It spoke of a place, almost a myth, a remote monastery nestled deep in the jagged, mist-shrouded mountains. A place that taught not a religion, but a way of being. It was led by a master craftsman, a potter named Elian, who was said to possess a profound and unsettling stillness. The article claimed that people didn't go there to learn how to add anything to their lives. Not new beliefs, not new skills, not new mantras. They went there to learn how to subtract. They went there to learn the art of emptying the vessel. The idea was absurd. A potter? In the mountains? It sounded like a fable. But the desperation in Kyle's soul was a powerful force, overriding his rational architectural mind. He had spent his life building, adding, and accumulating. The concept of emptying, of subtracting, was both terrifying and intoxicatingly hopeful. With nothing left to lose, he booked a one-way ticket to a country he'd never heard of, packed a single bag, and left his glittering, chaotic life behind, setting out on a pilgrimage not to find an answer, but to find a way to silence the questions. The journey itself was the first lesson in letting go. It began with a long-haul flight, then a rattling train that snaked through lush, unfamiliar countryside, and finally, a dusty, bone-jarring bus ride that climbed higher and higher into the mountains. The sleek, predictable world of concrete and steel gave way to the untamed, chaotic beauty of nature. The constant signal on his phone vanished, severing his last link to the world of deadlines and emails. He was utterly disconnected, and the initial panic was overwhelming. His mind, deprived of its usual diet of external stimuli, turned on itself with a vengeance. The committee of critics became louder, more insistent. "What are you doing? This is insane. You're throwing away your career. You're a failure." For days, he walked, following a crudely drawn map, his city shoes shredding on the rocky terrain. He was stripped of his tailored suits, his status, his identity. He was just a man, alone with the deafening roar of his own mind, walking towards an unknown hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw it. Perched on a cliffside, overlooking a valley shrouded in perpetual mist, was the monastery of the silent stream. It was not a grand, ornate structure. It was a humble collection of buildings made of dark wood and gray stone, so perfectly integrated into the landscape that it seemed to have grown there. There was no grand entrance, only a simple wooden gate. As Kyle pushed it open, a profound silence enveloped him. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was a living, breathing stillness that seemed to absorb sound. In the center of a courtyard, an old man was methodically sweeping fallen leaves into patterns. He was small and wiry, with a face like a dried apple, etched with 1,000 lines of gentle wisdom. He moved with an unhurried grace, each sweep of his broom a deliberate, focused action. This had to be Elian. Kyle approached, his heart pounding, his carefully rehearsed speech ready. "Master Elian?" My name is Kale. I have traveled a long way. I have come to learn. I need to. I want to learn how to empty my mind." The old man stopped sweeping and looked up. His eyes were clear and bright, and they seemed to look right through Kale, past the exhausted traveler, and into the raging storm within. He offered a small, knowing smile. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he gestured with his chin towards a small wooden stool and a simple clay cup on a stone table nearby. "You are thirsty from your journey," Elian said, his voice calm and smooth like a river stone. "Before we speak of emptying great things like the mind, let us first practice with a small thing. A cup." Kyle, confused but obedient, sat down. Elian picked up a simple teapot and began to pour tea into the cup. He poured until the tea reached the brim, but he did not stop. The fragrant, steaming liquid overflowed, cascading down the sides of the cup and onto the stone table, forming a dark, spreading pool. Kyle watched, perplexed, as the master continued to pour into the already full cup, wasting the tea. "Master!" Kale finally interrupted, unable to contain his practical architect's mind. "Stop! The cup is already full. Nothing more will go in." Elian stopped pouring. He placed the teapot down and looked directly at Kale, his gentle smile never wavering. "Exactly," he said, his voice soft but resonant in the profound silence of the courtyard. "Like this cup, you have come to me full. You are full of your own opinions, your preconceptions, your worries, your ambitions, and your desperate need for answers. How can I show you anything new when your cup is already overflowing?" He gestured to the wasted tea on the table. "You cannot learn to empty your mind until you first empty your cup. Come back to me when you have done so." With that, Elian picked up his broom and resumed his sweeping, as if Kyle were no longer there. Kyle sat in stunned silence, staring at the full cup of tea. He had traveled thousands of miles, endured a brutal journey, and his first lesson was a riddle. Empty his cup? What did that even mean? He was an architect. He solved problems. He created solutions. He had come here for a blueprint, a set of instructions. Instead, he was left with a paradox, a simple, impossible task, and the dawning, terrifying realization that the work ahead would be harder than designing any skyscraper he had ever imagined. He had to unlearn a lifetime of learning. He had to become empty. For 3 days, Kale sat with that cup of tea. He didn't drink it. He just stared at it as it grew cold, a skin forming on its surface. His analytical mind, the mind that could visualize the stress tolerances of steel beams and the intricate dance of plumbing and electrical systems within a skyscraper, attacked the problem with ferocious intensity. Empty your cup was a variable, an equation to be solved. Did it mean he had to literally empty the cup? He did that, pouring the cold tea onto the ground, and felt nothing but foolishness. Did it mean he had to abandon his ambitions? He made a mental list of his career goals and tried to renounce them, but the exercise felt hollow and dishonest. Did it mean he had to meditate and stop thinking? He tried, sitting cross-legged until his knees screamed in protest. But attempting to stop his thoughts was like trying to dam a raging river with his bare hands. The more he tried to suppress them, the more violently they surged. The committee of critics in his head had a field day. You can't even solve a simple riddle. You failed the first test. You are an imposter here, just as you are in your own life. On the fourth morning, defeated and ready to admit this whole journey was a monumental mistake, he found Elian by a large empty stone basin at the edge of the monastery. Elian didn't acknowledge Kale's turmoil. He simply pointed to a well on one side of the courtyard and to the basin on the other. "The basin must be full by sunset," he said, handing Kale a wooden bucket. "This is your work for today." A simple physical task. Kale felt a surge of relief. This was something he could understand. A goal, a tool, a process. He took the bucket, plunged it into the well, and began the long walk across the courtyard. But as he walked, he noticed water sloshing over the sides and, more alarmingly, leaking from several cracks in the bucket's base. By the time he reached the basin and emptied the bucket, he had lost nearly half the water. He frowned. This was inefficient, an engineering problem. He told Elian, "The bucket is broken. It's inefficient. Give me a better bucket, or let me fix this one. I can make it watertight in an hour." Elian, who was now patiently sanding a piece of wood, looked up and shook his head gently. "The bucket is the bucket. The task is the task," he said, and returned to his work. Kyle felt a hot flash of his old-world anger. This was absurd, willfully inefficient. It was a waste of his time and energy. But he looked into the old man's calm, unyielding eyes and saw there was no room for negotiation. Gritting his teeth, he went back to the well. The day was an exercise in pure frustration. Each trip across the courtyard was a reminder of the futility of his task. His mind raced, calculating the rate of water loss, estimating the number of trips it would take, optimizing his path by a few inches. He was so consumed with the problem of the bucket and the goal of the basin that he was completely miserable. He didn't notice the warmth of the sun on his back, the feel of the cool stone beneath his feet, or the rhythmic sound of his own breathing. He was at war with the bucket. His mind screamed at its imperfections, its leaks, its stubborn refusal to be what he wanted it to be. By late afternoon, his body ached, and the basin was barely a third full. He was drenched in sweat and spilled water, his anger curdling into despair. He slumped down beside the basin, the leaky bucket beside him like a symbol of his failure. Elian approached and sat next to him, not with an air of judgment, but of quiet companionship. "You have been fighting the bucket all day," the master observed. "You have been in your head, calculating, cursing, resisting. You have been everywhere but here, on this path, with this water. You are trying to fill the basin, but you have not yet learned how to simply carry the water." He pointed to the leaky bucket. "Your mind is like this bucket. It is full of cracks, old habits, anxieties, judgments. You cannot fix it overnight. You cannot will it to be perfect. The work is not to curse the leaks. The work is to accept the bucket as it is, and to walk the path. The work is to carry the water. Tomorrow, you will not try to fill the basin. You will only focus on one trip at a time. Feel the weight of the water. Watch it splash. Listen to it leak. Be with the bucket. The filling of the basin is a consequence, not the goal." The next day, Cale tried. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. His mind rebelled, desperate for a goal, for a sense of accomplishment. But he forced himself to focus. The cool shock of the well water on his hands, the creak of the rope, the heavy strain in his shoulders as he lifted the full bucket, the unsteady rhythm of his steps, the small, pattering sound of the water leaking onto the stones. He started to notice things. The way the light caught the droplets as they fell, the unique pattern of each splash. He stopped seeing the leaks as a failure and began seeing them as just, a quality of the bucket. He emptied his mind of the destination and tried only to inhabit the journey. It was not a sudden epiphany, but a slow, gradual dawning. For a few seconds at a time, the raging committee in his head would fall silent, and there would be only the man, the bucket, and the water. At sunset, the basin was still not full. But Kyle's heart, for the first time in years, was not empty with despair. It was quiet. He had begun, ever so slightly, to empty his cup of the need for control and perfection. After a week of carrying water, when Kyle could finally make the journey without rage or frustration, Elian led him to a long, low building filled with the earthy scent of damp clay. This was the pottery workshop. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating shelves lined with bowls, vases, and cups, each one unique, some perfectly formed, others beautifully imperfect. In the center of the room was a large wooden trough filled with a mountain of gray, dense clay. "Your work in architecture begins with a blueprint, an idea," Elian said. "Our work begins with the earth itself. Before you can create, you must prepare. This clay is full of impurities, pebbles, air bubbles, inconsistencies. If you try to shape it as it will collapse on the wheel. It must be kneaded, wedged. He showed Cale the technique, a rhythmic process of cutting, slamming, and rolling the clay over and over to work out the imperfections and align its particles. This is your work now, he instructed, gesturing to the mountain of clay. For weeks, Cale did nothing but knead clay. It was back-breaking, monotonous labor. His hands, accustomed to pens and keyboards, became raw and caked in gray mud. His back and shoulders ached with a deep, unfamiliar burn, and his mind once again rebelled. This is beneath you. You are a world-renowned architect, and you are here, like a child, playing with mud. What is the point of this? The voices were relentless, but as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. The physical exertion exhausted his body to the point where his mind had little energy left for its frantic gymnastics. The repetitive motion of his hands slam, fold, press, turn became a kind of meditation. Elian would sit nearby, working silently on his own projects. One day, as Cale was wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of clay, he grunted in frustration. "I hate this," he muttered. "I hate feeling all these little rocks and pockets of air. I just want it to be smooth, perfect." Elian paused his work. "Do not hate them," he said calmly. "Acknowledge them. The pebble does not mean the clay is bad. It is simply a pebble. The air bubble is not a failure. It is simply air. You must feel for them, find them, and work them out with patience, not with anger. Your mind is like this clay, Cale. It is full of pebbles of old resentments, air pockets of fear. For your entire life, you have tried to build over them, to pretend they are not there. But they weaken the structure from within. Here, you will not ignore them. You will feel them. You will acknowledge the pebble of your father's disapproval. You will find the air bubble of your fear of failure. You will not analyze them or judge them. You will simply feel them. And with each fold of the clay, you will gently work them out. The goal is not perfect clay. The goal is the process of purification. Cale began to understand. As he needed, he allowed his thoughts and feelings to rise without resistance. The memory of his collapse in the boardroom, he felt the shame, the fear, and he folded it into the clay. The sting of a harsh criticism from years ago, he felt the anger, the hurt, and he pressed it into the clay. He stopped fighting his thoughts and instead saw them as impurities to be acknowledged and worked through. He was not destroying them, he was integrating them, making the whole mass stronger and more homogeneous. He was, in a very real, tactile way, processing the unprocessed clutter of his life. Finally, the day came when Elian deemed the clay ready. He led Kyle to a simple, foot-powered potter's wheel. "Today," he said, "we will give the clay a center." Kyle's heart beat faster. This was it. The moment of creation. He had watched Elian at the wheel, how he would effortlessly transform a lump of mud into an elegant, symmetrical vessel. It looked easy, graceful. Cale sat down, slapped a ball of his perfectly kneaded clay onto the wheel, and began to pump the treadle. The wheel started to spin. He wet his hands and gripped the clay, ready to impose his will, to raise a perfect cylinder just as he had visualized. The result was immediate and catastrophic. The moment his hands touched the spinning clay, it lurched violently off-center. He fought to bring it back, applying more pressure. The clay resisted, wobbling like a dying top. He pushed harder, his knuckles white. The clay suddenly folded, collapsed. It is full of pebbles of old resentments, air pockets of fear. For your entire life, you have tried to build over them, to pretend they are not there. But they weaken the structure from within. Here, you will not ignore them. You will feel them. You will acknowledge the pebble of your father's disapproval. You will find the air bubble of your fear of failure. You will not analyze them or judge them. You will simply feel them. And with each fold of the clay, you will gently work them out. The goal is not perfect clay. The goal is the process of purification. Cale began to understand. As he needed, he allowed his thoughts and feelings to rise without resistance. The memory of his collapse in the boardroom, he felt the shame, the fear, and he folded it into the clay. The sting of a harsh criticism from years ago, he felt the anger, the hurt, and he pressed it into the clay. He stopped fighting his thoughts and instead saw them as impurities to be acknowledged and worked through. He was not destroying them, he was integrating them, making the whole mass stronger and more homogeneous. He was, in a very real, tactile way, processing the unprocessed clutter of his life. Finally, the day came when Elian deemed the clay ready. He led Kyle to a simple, foot-powered potter's wheel. Today, he said, we will give the clay a center. Kyle's heart beat faster. This was it, the moment of creation. He had watched Elian at the wheel, how he would effortlessly transform a lump of mud into an elegant, symmetrical vessel. It looked easy, graceful. Cale sat down, slapped a ball of his perfectly kneaded clay onto the wheel, and began to pump the treadle. The wheel started to spin. He wet his hands and gripped the clay, ready to impose his will, to raise a perfect cylinder just as he had visualized. The result was immediate and catastrophic. The moment his hands touched the spinning clay, it lurched violently off-center. He fought to bring it back, applying more pressure. The clay resisted, wobbling like a dying top. He pushed harder, his knuckles white. The clay suddenly folded, collapsing into a shapeless, pathetic heap of mud. He tried again, and again, and again. For the entire day, he failed. Every attempt ended in the same muddy collapse. His frustration mounted, turning into a cold, familiar rage. The architect in him, the master of precision and control, was utterly impotent. The clay seemed to have a malicious mind of its own, actively resisting his every command. "Why can't I do this?" he finally roared, slamming his fist into the collapsed lump of clay and splattering mud across the floor. "I'm doing exactly what you do, but it won't obey." Elian, who had been watching silently from a corner, walked over. He didn't offer technical advice. He simply said, "You are trying to force the clay to your center. You believe the center is a place you must command it to go. But the true center is not a location. It is a state of balance. The wheel is spinning. The clay wishes to find its balance on that spin. But your hands are full of tension. Your mind is full of the perfect cylinder you wish to create. You are full of the fear of failure. The clay feels all of this. It feels your force, your anxiety, your ambition. And so, it fights you. It cannot find its balance because you have lost yours." He dipped his hands in water and gently placed them over Cale's on the next lump of clay. "Forget the cylinder," he whispered. "Forget me. Forget being a student. Forget being an architect. There is no success here. There is no failure. There is only the spin of the wheel, the feeling of the clay, and the breath in your lungs. Let your hands be soft. Don't tell the clay what to do. Listen to it. Feel where it wants to go. Find the center with it, not for it. Empty your hands of force. Empty your mind of the result. Just be here, now." Cale closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to release the tension in his shoulders, his jaw, his hands. He started the wheel, slowly this time. He touched the clay, not to command it, but just to feel it, to feel the gentle pull of the centrifugal force. The voices in his head were still there, whispering of failure, but he tried to let them go, to let them be pebbles in the stream of his consciousness. He focused on Elian's words. Just be here, now. He felt the subtle vibration of the clay, a slight wobble. Instead of fighting it, he eased his pressure, moving with it, coaxing, guiding. For a fleeting second, the wobble subsided. The clay felt still and stable beneath his palms, spinning in a perfect, harmonious union with the wheel. It felt centered, and in that moment, the entire world fell away. There was no past, no future, no Kyle the architect, no Elian the master. There was only the silent, spinning present. And then his mind blinked. A thought, I'm doing it! Shot through his consciousness, his hands tensed with excitement, and the clay instantly buckled, collapsing into another muddy ruin. He had held the center for only a second, but it was enough. He had felt it. He opened his eyes, not in anger, but in awe. He had just tasted the silence he had been searching for, and he now knew that the path to it was not through force or intellect, but through surrender. The next morning, Cale returned to the wheel not with the aggressive ambition of a conqueror, but with the quiet humility of a student. He understood that the enemy was not the clay. It was the frantic, grasping nature of his own mind. He sat down, and for a long time, he just breathed. He didn't touch the clay. He simply sat, feeling the hard wooden stool beneath him, listening to the distant cry of a mountain hawk, and watching the dust motes dance in the sunbeams. He was emptying his cup of the previous day's failure, arriving at the present moment with nothing but the intention to be there. When he finally placed the clay on the wheel, his movements were different. They were slower, more deliberate. He began the spin, and as he touched the clay, he closed his eyes, focusing all his awareness on the sensations in his hands. The voices of the inner committee began their chatter, but now they seemed distant, like a radio playing in another room. He acknowledged them and let them fade, returning his focus again and again to the feeling of the clay. There were still failures, dozens of them, but they no longer felt like catastrophic personal indictments. Each collapse was simply feedback, a gentle message from the clay. You are not here. You are in the future, worrying about the shape. Come back. You are not here. You are in the past, frustrated by the last attempt. Come back. With each collapse, he would take a breath, scrape the mud off the wheel, and begin again, seeing it not as a setback, but as another opportunity to practice returning to the present. The process slowly rewired his brain. He had spent a lifetime strengthening the neural pathways of anxiety and control. Now, he was patiently carving new pathways of presence and surrender. Days bled into a week, and then another. Then one afternoon, it happened. Without force, without even a conscious thought of making a pot, he found the center and held it. He felt the clay become still and pliable beneath his hands, a willing partner. He gently applied pressure, and the walls began to rise. He wasn't thinking, he was simply responding, his hands moving with an intuitive grace he didn't know he possessed. The world disappeared. There was only the gentle whir of the wheel, the smooth slip of the wet clay, and the rhythm of his own calm breath. When he opened his eyes, he saw it. It was a small, simple bowl, no taller than his hand. It wasn't perfectly symmetrical, its lip was slightly uneven, but it was whole. It was born not of force, but of flow. He looked at it, and for the first time since he could remember, he felt a clean, unadulterated sense of peace. The joy was not in the object he had created, but in the state of mind he had inhabited to create it. He had not just shaped a bowl, he had experienced an empty mind. Now that he could consistently center the clay and raise the walls, his architect's mind re-emerged, albeit in a quieter form. He began sketching designs, tall, elegant vases, wide, perfectly proportioned platters. He had a vision in his head, a blueprint, and he approached the wheel with a renewed sense of purpose. But the clay, once again, seemed to have other ideas. When he tried to pull the walls up tall and thin for a vase, They would collapse under their own weight. When he tried to stretch the base wide for a platter, it would tear. His creations were clumsy, thick, and nothing like the elegant forms he had imagined. He wasn't enraged anymore, just deeply perplexed. He took one of his lopsided bowls to Elian. "I don't understand," he said. "I can find the center now. I can stay present. But I can't make the clay do what I want it to do. It won't follow the design in my head." Conversation between man and earth. He was letting Elian took the bowl, holding it gently in his palms. He ran a thumb over its uneven lip. "You have learned to find the center, which is a great step," he said. "Now you must learn the second great lesson of the clay. You are not its master. You are its partner. This clay," he said, gesturing to the trough, "has its own nature. Some days it is more yielding. Some days it is more firm. It has its own limits. Your blueprint is a beautiful thing, an intention. But it is not a command. A true potter does not simply force his will upon the clay. He listens to it. He feels how it responds. If the walls begin to thin, he does not force them higher. He feels that the clay wishes to be a wider, more open bowl. He collaborates with what is rather than fighting for what he thinks should be. He looked Kyle in the eye. Life is the same. You come to it with your perfect blueprints, how your career should go, how your relationships should be, how your day should unfold. And when life, like the clay, responds differently, you become frustrated. You try to force it, and it collapses. The art is not to abandon your intentions, but to hold them lightly, to have a vision, but to be willing to collaborate with the reality of the present moment. Go back to the wheel. This time, do not try to make a vase. Begin with the intention of a vase. But then, listen. Let the clay help you decide what it wants to become. This was, perhaps, the most profound lesson of all for Cale, the master planner. He returned to the wheel and began to practice this new way of being. He would start with an idea, but he would pay exquisite attention to the feedback from the clay. He learned to feel the subtle resistance that told him not to pull the walls higher, the gentle yielding that invited him to open the form wider. His creations began to change. They were not the perfectly symmetrical, machine-like objects from his sketches. They had an organic, authentic quality. Each one was a unique result of a silent conversation between man and earth. He was letting go of the attachment to the outcome, finding a deeper creative freedom in the process itself. After several months, Kyle had a small collection of his best work, a dozen bowls and cups that he felt were born of true presence and partnership. Elian declared them ready for the final step, the fire. He showed Cale the kiln, a massive ancient stone structure that looked like a slumbering beast. "The kiln is the final master," Elian explained as they carefully glazed the pots. "We have done our work. We have prepared the clay, centered it, shaped it with presence. But the fire will have the final say. It will transform the clay into stone. It will melt the glaze into glass. But it is a violent, unpredictable process. The heat can crack a hidden flaw. The colors can change in ways we do not expect. We must put the pots in, and then we must surrender. We must let go of all control." As Kyle placed his precious creations into the dark maw of the kiln, he felt a familiar anxiety creep in. He had worked so hard. He wanted them to be perfect. They sealed the kiln and lit the fire. For a day and a night, it roared, a contained inferno. 2 days later, after it had cooled, it was time to open it. Kyle held his breath as Elian removed the heavy stone door. He peered inside. His pots were there, transformed. The glazes shimmered with a depth of color he hadn't imagined. But as he began to take them out, he saw the flaws. The beautiful celadon glaze on his favorite bowl had a dark, dramatic drip running down one side, a place where it had run too thick. A small cup had a slight warp, leaning almost imperceptibly to one side. A faint crack, like a tiny lightning bolt, had appeared near the base of another. His heart sank. They were not perfect. He showed the drippy bowl to Elian, his disappointment evident. "Look," he said. "A mistake." Elian took the bowl and turned it in the light, his eyes full of admiration. "A mistake?" he said. "Or a story? You see a flaw. I see the mark of the fire. I see a unique beauty that could never be planned or replicated. In our world, we have a concept called Wabi-Sabi. It is the art of finding beauty in things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. This drip is not a failure. It is the bowl's character. It is its history. It is what makes it truly alive. You have spent your life chasing a sterile and lifeless perfection. But life itself is not perfect. It is messy, unpredictable, and beautiful in its imperfections. To find peace, you must learn to see the beauty in the drip, in the warp, in the crack. You must learn to accept the beautiful imperfection of your own life. Cale looked at the bowl again, through Elian's eyes. The drip was no longer a mistake. It was a mark of distinction, a dramatic flourish painted by the fire itself. In that moment, he understood. He had not come here to learn how to make perfect pots. He had come here to learn how to embrace his own imperfect, beautifully flawed humanity. He stayed for one more week, not as a student, but as a resident of the silence. He knew it was time to go. He had found what he was looking for, not an answer, but a practice. On the morning of his departure, he found Elian in the courtyard, sweeping leaves. There were no grand farewells. Cale simply bowed, his heart full of a gratitude too deep for words. "The monastery is not a destination, Cale," Elian said, his eyes kind. "It is a training ground. The world you are returning to is your true monastery. Do not forget the feeling of the clay. Do not forget the lesson of the leaky bucket. The practice is not to live on a mountaintop. The practice is to carry the silence of the mountain within you into the heart of the noisy city." Kyle returned to his world. On the surface, nothing had changed. He still lived in the penthouse. He was still a renowned architect. But within him, everything was different. The first big test came in a client meeting. The project's primary investor was pulling out. A crisis that would have previously sent Cale into a spiral of panic and catastrophic thinking. The old voices started to rise. "This is a disaster! You're ruined!" But now he recognized them. They were just pebbles in the clay. He took a breath. He felt the solid ground beneath his feet. He found his center. Instead of reacting with fear, he responded with a calm, creative clarity that surprised everyone, including himself. He didn't have a magic solution, but his mind was empty of the clutter of panic, leaving it open and receptive. A new path forward emerged, not from force, but from flow. At home, his partner noticed the change immediately. He was present. When she spoke, he listened, his mind not wandering to blueprints or deadlines. He was there, fully, his attention a quiet gift. One evening, he stood by his vast window, looking down at the sprawling, glittering city. He used to see it as a monument to his own ambition and a landscape of potential failures. Now, he saw it differently. He saw the chaotic, messy, imperfect beauty of it all. He saw millions of lives, millions of stories, all spinning together. He no longer felt the need to control it or conquer it. He simply felt a sense of quiet connection to it. His mind, once a crowded prison, was now a quiet garden. Thoughts still came, worries still arose, but they no longer took root and choked out the light. They were simply clouds passing in a vast open sky. He had not eliminated his thoughts. He had simply stopped identifying with them. He had emptied his mind not of its contents, but of its tyranny. And in that quiet, empty space, he had finally found room to live. Your life is your clay. Your daily challenges are your potter's wheel. You do not need a monastery on a distant mountain to begin. Your practice can be found right here, right now. It can be in the simple act of washing the dishes, feeling the warm water on your hands without thinking of the next task. It can be in a walk through a park, noticing the intricate pattern on a single leaf. It is in the conscious choice to let go of yesterday's mistake and to not mortgage the peace of this moment for the anxieties of tomorrow. The journey to empty your mind is the work of a lifetime. It is the patient, repetitive, and profoundly liberating art of returning again and again to the silent, creative center of your own being. Begin now. Take a breath. Empty your cup and see what beautiful, imperfect thing you can create in the space that remains.